Hey everyone, Skulk here. I cannot express how excited I was for this interview with the Netlify team. It was a phenomenal discussion and I could have gone on for hours and hours more. And exactly because of that, I want to just thank those who made it possible. So first and foremost, this was made possible by a company with the name Aruba. They are based in Cape Town. Both Justin and I have some really good friends there. It's a phenomenal company. I've worked with the team before to do several charity and tech for good events, and they are currently looking for a senior front-end engineer with at least about 5 years experience. If this is something you might be interested in, maybe just check out this link. I'll put it in the video as well. It should include more information about the team and what they're looking for and so forth. Then, as always, I just want to give a massive shout out to our long-term sponsors, which is IO and NML. We've been working with IO now for a very long time. They're a phenomenal team. They're extremely involved in the community, especially within the world of product design. They're the core maintainers behind the ZAPT, which is South African product design community. Then I would also be amiss if I didn't give a shout out to NML, which is actually the company that Justin works for. They've been with us from the very start and we owe them so much. Justin will also share a bit about the products that he works on at NML during this discussion. You can check out both of them at these links down here. I'll also add it in the description. And with that out of the way, I'll hand over to Justin.
I just want to make two announcements. So there are two meetups I just want to draw to people's attention if they're not aware of them, and we'll share these in all our channels as well. And I'll post them in the links. But there's, as you know, there's quite a lot of stuff going on the continent as a whole, not just in South Africa. So one thing that's happening is Connect Dev Africa, and they're hosting a meetup next Thursday. It's a community for connecting developers and developer communities, and they are doing a talk on building accessible design systems. So I'll pop that link in the chat. And we'll also share it on our usual channels. And then the second one I want to just mention is the Nairobi GraphQL meetup. And they're having an event next Friday, which is sponsored by Prisma. And it's on building a GraphQL API with Prisma. So again, great stuff that's happening on the continent as a whole. And we definitely want to, forge more ties with our fellow meetup groups, on the African continent. So we'll share those with everyone. Right. So, I'm super excited for this evening, and I'm so happy to have Kenny and Phil with us. I use Netlify as much as I possibly can.
Our website is on Netlify as well.
Our website is on Netlify. My personal website is on Netlify. Every time we want to put anything online, it's on Netlify. My company has built sites on Netlify. We're huge fans. So we're really, really happy to have you here. And hopefully what we discussed tonight and all the things we just chat about can get some traction in South Africa, because I think to some extent, and Skulk will maybe back me up on this, Jamstack is still kind of a niche here. It hasn't taken off as much as it may have in other parts of the world. And I think perhaps there isn't quite as much awareness of what it offers you and what you can do with it. And that there's maybe a misconception that it's just for your, static blog or whatever it might be, rather than the powerful things that you can actually do with it. So as Skulk mentioned, we do have some questions, and I know Skulk has probably 1,000 other ones he hasn't shared yet. But perhaps we could just start off with Phil and Kenny, if you could just tell us a little bit about yourselves and, your background a little bit and what you do at Netlify, and why is Netlify so awesome?
I can answer that question. But yeah, go ahead.
Kenny, do you want to go first?
Yeah, I want to go first. So my name is Ekene Eze. I'm developer experience engineer at Netlify, and Phil is my boss. So if I say anything wrong, he will get me fired. Yeah, feel over to you now.
I mean, the only reason I'm here is to see if I can find a way to get Kenny fired. Obviously, that's
Okay.
why.
Well, we are recording it, so I
This
can
is
just
actually going out in
send
public.
send
Okay.
it to you.
All right, we'll behave ourselves a little bit more.
You can analyze it like in slow motion every single
Right. Well, yeah. So thanks for the nice introduction. Yeah, I'm Phil Hawksworth, and yeah, I'm a part of the developer experience team at Netlify, along with Kenny and a bunch of our lovely colleagues. I've been at Netlify for just coming up to 4 years now, and so I've seen quite a bit of growth there in that time. Before joining Netlify, I worked as a technical director at an agency. So that's how I kind of came across Netlify, because I was involved in trying to figure out technical architectures for kind of different client projects and what have you. And usually that would result in me pulling my hair out, trying to figure out how to build the right things that the client needed, but also on the stack that they prescribed. And so that led me to what at the time, we thought of as static sites, later became kind of rebadged a little bit and expanded on a little bit in this thing that we talk about, Jamstack, and a few things along those lines. So yeah, I was a big enthusiast of Netlify before I joined a few years ago, and yeah, now get to enjoy working with Kenny and the rest of the team, either speaking at events, trying to build demos, just stress testing the platform a little bit, and then also not only just telling people how, what's possible on the platform, but also hearing from people either things that they're making with it, or frustrations or limitations or suggestions for how to expand it. So it's kind of a fun two-way conversation we have, where we get to be that bridge between people using it and the engineering team, which is lots and lots of fun.
Which is also part of why I like my job at Netlify, and the fact that we get to interact with the community like this and hear from everyone, listen to their pain points, bring it back to the team, build demos like Phil rightly mentioned. That's really interesting, and I enjoy it a lot.
Yeah, same.
Great, thanks very much. Right, shall we dive right into the questions then?
Any questions at all, we're happy to try our best. Yeah, so
Yes.
I have a really hardball one that I'm going to throw. So good luck, guys.
This is for Kenny then.
Okay, Kenny, when is the South African CDN coming?
I can answer that actually. I had to do some digging.
Kind of changed my name. I'm not Kenny anymore.
You just figure out the Dubai one first.
Yes.
So I can offer a little information around that actually, because so this is something that changes quite a lot. So the exact points of presence around the CDN do change quite often. So having an updated list is always something that's a little bit in flux. However, there is actually a point of presence in Cape Town already. Right. However, it's not on the free CDN. So all of the features that we offer, well, I think more or less all of the features are available on the starter tier, the free tier, if you like. But it's only when you start like going through the paid tiers that you get access to some of the kind of more high performance CDN and build infrastructure. So on the high performance CDN, there are like another, I don't know, 30 nodes or so distributed around the world, and one of those is in Cape Town. So
interesting.
So that's the answer to that. Who's to say though what will happen on the public CDN, if you like? I know it's strange calling a CDN either public or not public. They're all, they're public things, but the one that's generally available to everyone. I'm sure that's going to gradually expand over time as well. But at the moment, getting access to nodes in South Africa, that's available on the high performance CDN.
Okay, cool. And when so when you say paid plan, there's various paid modules and plans and so forth. Would that be the team a paid team account?
No, that is. I think that's on the HP tier, which I think is through enterprise. So that is one.
Okay. So
It's
that's
the kind of thing that
kind of what we see when we go to the pricing page.
Exactly.
Okay.
Yeah. So if you go to /enterprise, then you start to get into that kind of area. But typically those conversations are the kind of conversations that happened with an account manager and someone's in the sales team to help spec out the whole offering, rather than like a quick kind of sign up onto the kind of starter or the team tier. Typically we see the demand for, or the call for putting your site on the high performance CDN, or the higher grade CDN, if you like, being the kind of thing that really is tended to be needed by businesses at a certain scale rather than everybody. Is why we might kind of make that differentiation, so that we can try and offer the rest of the things for free for more people.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. My personal website is not going to need that kind of infrastructure.
It's that kind of it's one of those good problems, isn't it? If it's at the point that it does, then you're probably doing a lot of things right, and the point that you demands it, then you've got other.
Well, I'm definitely not doing a lot of things right yet.
So no, I was just curious about that, because so you guys will actually be glad to hear that. So I kind of worked on a lot of like public sector things as well, and we actually have some governmental services and sites that actually run on Netlify in South Africa. But yeah, that was one of the things. So what we ended up doing is kind of funneling it through Cloudflare. Which does, but that kind of just seemed like such a waste. So I was always like curious why that's the case.
It's an interesting one, actually, that, because I think it's a fairly common pattern that people will think, oh well, I can put Cloudflare in front of this, so I'll get this CDN in front of it.
In front of your CDN,
in front of the CDN. And so in actual fact, we tend to recommend people don't do that.
Really?
I mean, there's no harm in doing that, but it does mean that you're adding an extra level of complexity on top of what you already have. Because that one of the things that Netlify does for you kind of under the covers, so that people like me never will have to ever worry about it, is all of the kind of cache management and the cache busting and those kind of things.
That was an issue
all the way through. And of course, if you put a CDN in front of that, then you're getting back into the territory of, well, how do I then signify to my extra layer on top of that I need to bust the cache? So you can start to introduce actually some performance kind of overheads on top of that. And people do it. It's very common, but it's one of those slightly counterintuitive things that were you in a kind of traditional kind of self-hosted monolithic stack, putting a CDN in front of all of these things that's pretty desirable if you can manage the CDN effectively. But of course, that's one of the things that Netlify tries to do on your behalf, so that you don't need to. But yeah, if one of the reasons that that's happening in your context is trying to get access to more local CDN points of presence, then there are other options, but of course there's different costs associated with that. So it's kind of depends on the client, depends on the need, I think.
Because one of the problems we do have in South Africa is latency, because that comes with being kind of like at the endmost point of Africa, like it needs to travel quite some way to get here. So yeah, that's unfortunately always a reality. But like as Justin said, like for my personal site or his site, like we probably don't worry about things like that. And to be honest, you're probably saving more by kind of just like having a Jamstack approach that you would have gotten like if you actually were maintaining a LAMP server or something. So like that, generally it's still a good trade-off. But I remember like that I think the CDN that we actually ended up getting was I think in Brazil or something. So yeah, that was unfortunately, especially when you're working with government and so forth, that was quite of quite a hairy thing to deal with.
Yeah, were there concerns about things like where data resides and those kind of things if you're dealing with a government? Yeah, okay, interesting.
Yeah, no,
that was the Treasury project, Carl.
Yeah, the Treasury one.
Yeah, it was Treasury data, so
all
the money.
just like kind of unpacking kind of like just the idea of serverless and the cloud and whatever. That was just it's so interesting. I don't want to go on too much of a tangent, but it's so interesting. I never let go a good opportunity to share this, as they actually, so the actual main Treasury site is actually a static site. It's like still built of like tables and whatever, and it's actually hosted on their own premise. So what happens is, around the time that is kind of the national budget speech or whatever, everyone's kind of hitting that site. But because it doesn't have a DB, it's essentially a static site. It never falls over because the DB never locks. It just gets really, really slow. So you would hit the site and it would take like half an hour for a page. It would eventually load, but like it load like it almost reminds me of those way back, like the 50K like modem, where the image like just comes like
or the anticipation.
Exactly.
It's a logo for the Treasury Department.
It's such a strange experience, because I'm just so used to, if a site doesn't respond within like, let's say 5 seconds, it's probably going to fall over and not resolve. So that's a very interesting experience, but yeah.
But all power to them for making the decision to make it a pre-rendered like static site anyway, because I mean it's I think the larger the organization, the harder it can be to convince people that actually you can generate this stuff ahead of time and render it. I think there's always the expectation of, well, if we've got lots of data and we don't quite know what people are coming for, we'll have to do everything dynamically, on demand, kind of, fry things up on demand rather than baking them out ahead of time. And so getting to the realization that, actually we could simplify things at request time by doing, a build ahead of time is something that not every particularly large organizations, in my experience, large brands are immediately kind of comfortable with. It takes a little bit of time, I think, to kind of come to that realization. But I do think that that's happening more and more. I think more and more companies are starting to kind of see the benefits of that kind of architecture, which is, it's interesting to see the tide gradually changing there, I think.
Yeah. But I think I maybe want to open the floor, and whether it's Justin or anyone else, if any of you have any questions.
Does anyone else have questions before? I mean, I do.
I'm curious as well if other people on the call either currently use Netlify or use other services similar to Netlify, and maybe use kind of like a pre-generated approach with AWS or Azure or Vercel or anyone else. I'm kind of curious whether people want to put that in the chat or speak up, whichever people prefer. I'm kind of curious about that.
Yeah.
Martin looks like he's gearing up.
Martin, you're using Netlify, right?
Yeah. So the work that we've got, or the company I work for, we've got two big parent companies from the US. They make like a lot of money, winning hundreds of millions of dollars every year. We've got Border.io and Gatsby sites for them, and it all goes through Netlify. Basically, for each of them, we've got sort of, just your basic setup of a dev server that goes through Netlify, and then staging and production.
Right. Nice. That's cool.
Yeah. Just from my side as well. At my company, we're in the process of redesigning and rebuilding our company website, and we are using Strapi as the CMS and with a GraphQL endpoint, and then a NextJS front end that we're going to be deploying through Netlify. And we're hosting the Strapi instance on Azure. So, and it just works like, it's fantastic. We just got the GraphQL endpoint into the NextJS front end. And I mean, which brings me to a question actually, is I seem to have noticed from people I follow on Twitter who are involved with Netlify, like Cassidy and Jason, and you guys have been doing a lot of work, it seems to me, with Next. Is that is my perception incorrect, or is that right? And perhaps you could just talk a little bit about why, has Next become quite a big thing for you? Do you think it's a great front end tool? Because I seem to see that you're optimizing lots of things for NextJS.
Yeah, that's right. I promise I'll take a breath and let Kenny speak in a minute.
Yeah.
He's not going to mess up unless you give him an opportunity to mess up.
Kenny never messes up.
I was quietly waiting for the go ahead.
I would just say that we're seeing that NextJS is just very, very popular at the moment, and it's it's a great framework. It's really it's very popular. It's very powerful. And I think one of the things that we want to make sure we do at Netlify is we want to let people use whatever tools that they want as effectively as possible. I mean, that's one of the things that attracted me to Netlify in the first place. The fact that I was using Jekyll and then I was using Hugo, and it didn't really matter. Whatever tool I wanted, it meant that I'd still get the same experience and the same kind of workflow and pipeline. And so we want to make sure that that's available for whatever tool people are passionate about. So a year or two ago, there was a load of momentum around Gatsby, which is still very, very popular. And of course, we wanted to make sure that really lived as a first-class citizen on Netlify. And now we're seeing more attention around NextJS. So we've been wanting to make sure that there's a really seamless experience on Netlify for people who are using NextJS as well. So that's why you're seeing lots of attention. But we're also exploring kind of other frameworks as well. I know that Netlify. I'm rebranding Kenny as Netlify. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Kenny
from Netlify.
Yeah, exactly. We all just get called Netlify. That's the.
You assume that name once you join.
Also, I really like NextJS. As a developer, I mix some of my demos with it, and I mean, it's just really nice to know that you can get a site up in minutes with NextJS, and kind of also part of why we do our job at Netlify is to make sure that we are constantly supporting all frameworks and get them deployed on Netlify so that you have the same seamless experience, regardless of where you're coming from. I also think the part of the popularity is also because NextJS came in handy to solve developers' problems when it was really important, right? The introduction of incremental static regeneration was really good, and it got a lot of attention. And we just wanted to be sure to make sure that we support developers who are wherever they are, to be honest. Which is like the framework agnostic part of Netlify is what I love most about it, right? And that's why we built the essential Next plugin to ensure that no matter what you want to do, wherever you're coming from, you can still get it done on Netlify, right? And I'm a personal NextJS developer because I built some of my demos with it, so I really like it. And when I'm teaching about the Jamstack, I kind of also use NextJS because get static parts and get static props just helps me make things really clear to people that I'm teaching. So I have a YouTube channel where I've put out a few tutorials on that, where I really like their approach. So every now and then, I think the popularity is accrued to the problem they are solving, and we are just trying to make sure that we cater for NextJS developers everywhere as well.
Great.
One of the nice things, actually, I'm sorry, Justin.
No, I just wanted to say, I mean, when you're talking about ease of use for developers, and I mean, and that's something that Netlify, in my experience, does so well. I mean, I had you mentioned Jekyll.
That is all thanks to Phil. He does all the hard work.
Yeah, correct. It was all me.
Yeah. Also, Kenny no longer fired after that.
Given a raise.
He knows how to talk to me.
Guess who's keeping their job now?
I mean, I built my personal site in Jekyll, years ago, when Jekyll was, the thing, and then it just languished, and then I moved it from whatever old hosting, service it was running on, probably via FTP or something, to Netlify. And it just worked. And then about a year ago, I switched to 11T and it just worked. And, I needed to do very, very little to make sure that my site, every time I just did a push, it built, or did a pull request or whatever. And I mean, I think Netlify, I think you've got that so right. The UI itself and the user experience in the application it's so intuitive. You really, I've never been stuck. I've never had to go and go, oh, how do I do this on Netlify? It's just, I've just always been able to do it. And I mean, I can get an HTTPS, I can get a certificate, I can just, and it's just a few clicks, and it's really, so I think that's one of the, from my experience as a user, that ease of use, no matter what framework you're using, I think is just, you've really nailed it.
Yeah. I was currently playing around with SvelteKit. I think I made a tweet about it last week, that I wanted to see how SvelteKit worked in building Jamstack applications, and I didn't know it was possible to get it up on Netlify in a minute. Like I surprised myself, right? I'm like, okay, I did a small thing, and can I deploy this on Netlify? Can I did, and oh my God. So it kind of surprises me sometimes too, right? How good the platform is. So you're not alone, Justin. I'm just agreeing with you there.
Yeah. And I think this is part and parcel of kind of embracing this architecture of, okay, you run a build and then that generates assets and then you put that in a place. And which is the heart of like the Jamstack approach. Because if you could make the assumption that, well, all right, my build, whatever build it is, whatever tools I'm using to run here, if there's a compute that happens and then that results in a folder full of assets, and I know that that's what I have to put somewhere, you get this deploy artifact. It means that all of those, frankly, quite complicated things of taking a folder of assets and then distributing that around the world on a CDN and doing all of the cache management. It means that that's the same for all of the sites, effectively. You're using the same model, which means that you can take experts in those really dry, deep, kind of dark, technical aspects of serving assets, and so just apply your knowledge to all of these sites, so you can almost kind of make that a solved problem for all of the developers. And that's the thing that gets me really excited about this model, because it means that any developer, whether they're someone who's working on a government scale project like a blue chip big enterprise client, or they're using the tool for their own project that they're experimenting with, or like Tashinga's doing his own kind of personal projects and what have you, you all get the benefit of that kind of that infrastructure kind of configuration without needing to know about it. I say it so many times, I never want to have to understand cache management, because it's the easiest thing to mess up. So I want to inherit that.
That and naming things.
Exactly.
Yeah.
I think what I really like as well, now that you've mentioned it, Phil, is that building in a way that at the end of the day, when you run your build command, all your assets gets generated and put in a folder that can then be deployed, means that somebody like me never really have to worry about managing web servers, because that is just kind of like a nightmare for me that I just never want to have to do. It kind of allows me to just stay in my small zone of being a front-end engineer and just doing my front-end things, and never have to configure servers or manage the cache or know when to purge it and not purge it and all of that. That's like one good benefit of building the Jamstack way that I really appreciate.
And that small area of expertise, as Kenny phrases it, is just getting bigger all the time as well, isn't it? Because I mean, I think we've kind of finally seen recognition for front-end engineering as a really important craft, because I used to kind of describe it as where the rubber meets the road, because all of the design that goes on, all of the kind of infrastructure tuning and all of the rest of it falls apart if you don't put the right things in the UI in the browser and do it poorly. So I think we're seeing so much more awareness of the importance of that craft. So as Kenny says, it kind of lets front-end engineers be front-end engineers and focus on those concerns, which I really value. I think it's super important.
Yeah, I completely agree with that. I think it's such a powerful thing. It's such a powerful thing to be able to build what you know and know that you can put this out there on the web without any, with hooking up your repo and off you go. Yeah. And it's very empowering because you don't have to go and sign up a 12-month contract for a hosting company like you used to have to do.
Yeah.
And all of that stuff, and it's extremely empowering on that level that a lot of people, and I mean, especially in a place like South Africa, where things are expensive. I mean, hosting in South Africa, if you go to one of your traditional hosting companies, and there's still loads of them. I don't know what the case is in Europe or Asia, or and they'll lock you into a never-ending contract. It's so much money every month for a shared server with no CDN or anything like that. And it's incredibly disempowering, especially in a country where there's a massive, massive discrepancy and inequality between people who can afford that and people who just can't. They just can't afford it. Whereas with something like Netlify, it empowers you so much because you just need an internet connection and you can get your stuff online. And so it's not just that developer experience that you're getting, which is fantastic, but in a sense, something like Netlify, especially in developing countries, it's immensely powerful as a social tool, as a social good. And I mean, that's one of the reasons why I'm such a huge supporter of Netlify, and I'm tell everyone about it. And I mean, Skulk and I, we've done a lot of work in like the tech for good space, and working on projects with activists and things like that. I mean, again, there's no money for those kinds of projects.
Yeah.
So being able to put your stuff online with really minimal cost it's extremely empowering for that. Yeah. So yeah.
I think that's also a trend for the industry as a whole as well. So I mean, we particularly see that around, excuse this very lofty expression, the Jamstack ecosystem. All of the like the vendors and services that kind of fit into this category of Jamstack. I think we're really starting to see more and more companies and services appear where the barrier to entry is just incredibly low. And as you mentioned, Justin, like the frustration of actually being able to try something for the first time is really high if you have to get an account manager or pay upfront for a big license or what have you. If you can't just try something and understand how it works, it's a big barrier to adoption for it in the first place. And so that was something I was always very excited about when I was working at an agency, like learning about a new tool and then being able to try it and stress test it before making a recommendation to a client about whether or not you could take on the project or if you had the tools to do it. And I think we're seeing a real trend towards that kind of model with, things like as a service. The fact that we've got these kind of decoupled CMSs where, it's a very different landscape to when I first, scoped out getting a CMS and the software license was over £1 million for the things that I was looking at. So what? It took many meetings and lots of debates. It's just so much easier to get started now with all of these different tools, and I think that's wonderful for every kind of developer and every kind of project.
Yeah, I think what Justin said makes a lot of sense to me, because obviously I think my entry into the world of web was by means of GeoCities back in the day, and you're laughing, but that's kind of that's immediately kind of the feeling that I got from Netlify as well, is it's like that moment when you upload something, like as someone who's just playing around with the web and whatever onto HTML file on GeoCities, and it's just there, and it's just as someone who's just kind of getting into this web thing as a hobby, it was amazing. And it's interesting how we've kind of come full circle again to kind of that space. And I Phil, and I don't know where I kind of heard this the first time. It might be in kind of the book that you co-authored, the O'Reilly book, talking about shortening the stack. And to me, that's such a nice way of putting it, because essentially all that we're doing is we're taking all these things and we're looking at, okay, where does it eventually end up? It eventually ends up in a CDN somewhere. It goes through this whole process of databases and load managing and whatever, and then we end up with the CDN. So why not just cut out like all that stuff in the middle and just go straight there? And I think to me that's such a neat idea of thinking of that we're just shortening the stack. It's not kind of a new stack. It's not, like I think especially a lot of the criticism that's kind of aimed in the world of like front end and so forth is that, oh, we're reinventing things that have already been solved, and I think like that to me is why it's such a interesting way to think of it, that we're not actually rebuilding anything. We're just cutting out a lot of the middle stuff that actually weren't actually needed for the end result. Yeah,
exactly. And that I mean, you're absolutely bang on with this observation that we're reusing lots of things that have been around for a long time. I mean, to be very I mean, we've already said that what things are hard: cache management and naming things. Well, okay, we talked about cache management. Let's talk about the name Jamstack for a minute. Oh dear.
I was gonna bring this up, so I'm glad that you have.
Yeah, I think Justin shared something about the book like maybe last week or so forth, and I saw it was still the capital JAM, and I'm like, oh yeah, that was a thing. I forgot about that.
That's one of the things, the problem with printing books is you're printing stuff on paper, and it's not so easy just to change.
You can't change the title of the book afterwards.
Change that but yeah, I mean, the fact that it's called, the fact that it was derived from the JAM of JavaScript APIs and markup, and that it was the word stack is in there because it's kind of it's kind of slightly descriptive, and it kind of trips off the tongue, and it gives you invokes the idea of, oh, here are the pieces of technology used to deliver this thing. That's all well and good, but a lot of people do point out, is it a stack? Because actually it's not. I mean, I could build this on all kinds of things. It's true. It's not strictly speaking a stack. And also, you don't have to use JavaScript and APIs and markup. I mean, I think the sites that I was first building that I think fell into the bucket of Jamstack were HTML and other front-end technologies, but no APIs being used. Yeah. No browser APIs, no third-party APIs. Very often either no or very little JavaScript. I'm a big proponent in using like the fewest, the least power. The rule of least power I think is super important, and so the more you can do with the simplest parts of the stack, the better. Use the word stack again. Suite of tools. So naming it is difficult, and people kind of. It's led to some confusion along the way, and I think that confusion has grown the more popular it's become, because more people are hearing about it, the word is spreading further. So then it's more people are interpreting it, and there's more misinterpretation. So it is difficult finding a name. And I heard some discussion recently about, well, maybe we should just drop this name, or we need to come up with a new name, which I must admit set my teeth on edge a tiny bit, because I didn't want to go around this journey once again. But I can understand why people say that. But I think for me, one of the biggest reasons to have a name for this in the first place was to be able to describe this to clients in a way that they could comprehend and then get on board with, in the same way that I saw that for progressive web apps. When I was trying to convince people that they didn't need a native application in the Apple Store, just so that they could get push notifications or something along those lines, or any kind of offline first experience, starting to describe, because you've got all of these different browser APIs that you can use in a website, clients would very quickly kind of go, oh, that sounds like lots of complexity to me. But when that was wrapped up in this convenient badge of PWAs, oh, what you need is a PWA, they could get on board with that. And it's like, okay, that conjures an image of an architectural approach. And, under the covers, there's lots of technology. And so that certainly for me, the term Jamstack served that purpose really well. And it meant that I could have a conversation with people about it that didn't mean going back to first principles. It's far from perfect. I was originally, before the term Jamstack came around, I was talking to clients about, I was kind of dubbing something the short stack. Nobody in the world was using that term, but I thought, I'll use that. And I mean, people did not take me seriously. They just thought I was talking about pancakes. But it was exactly rooted in just what you were talking about, Shok, about the, shortening, removing complexity from the stack of things you need, so you have fewer points of concern. But no, I abandoned that name when I realized that people didn't want to have a technology kind of umbrella term that's based around food, and then Jamstack comes along. So.
Yeah, but I think I've shared this with Justin before as well. Like I can't think of anything more true to the spirit of the web than like kind of going in a direction and realizing that, okay, it probably wasn't the best kind of decision, but it's kind of what we're stuck with and we need to make it work now. Like, like to me, that's so in line with kind of what the web has just become. So like to me, like it's just such a good fit.
Yeah, I mean, that's why we just simply did away with we actually asked the community around this. There's like a whole GitHub kind of discussion about it, about changing the spelling, and I mean, that's why we stopped capitalizing the J, A, and M, just to de-emphasize, oh, this is an abbreviation of terms, because that just leads people down another track. But the fact that it's still got the word stack in there, I think that's it makes people think of mean stack and whatever other stack, and so lamp stack. So of course it has those associations, but we could have come up with any other noun, I guess, and tried that. But as we all know, any noun.com has already been registered.
Yes. Yeah. I think
so
yeah, go ahead.
Sorry, Scott. Correct me if I'm wrong, but hasn't the Jamstack bit been removed from the Jamstack website? What's the website? Is it jamstack.org?
No,
doesn't mention that anymore, as far as I can, if I remember correctly. Scott, do you recall?
What the JavaScript API
it used to be as you landed on the page, it was JavaScript APIs markup, and I think now it's become a lot different.
We've massively de-emphasized that, and again, I don't know, I don't think we yet do a good enough job on that site of letting people know exactly what it is. I think maybe the best attempt at that is buried deep within the glossary on this page, Jamstack. So it's on the glossary for Jamstack, and that little one sentence I think is about the best articulation I've seen that causes that encapsulates it the best without I don't know, too much confusion. So a way of thinking about how to build for the web: the UI is compiled, the front end is decoupled, and data is pulled in as needed. I feel like that's a good launching point for conversations about this.
That is great.
But we've tucked that well away down inside the site. I think we need to surface that a bit more prominently.
Yeah,
I found it interesting that you contrasted. Sorry, Scott, I'm interrupting you all the time.
Go for it. I tend to do it to you, so it's only fair.
It's true. I found it interesting, Phil, that you mentioned progressive web apps as well, because for me, I also found, like, again, naming things. When I started to talk about, well, you've got a static kind of website where you're sharing, it's textual and there's some images. But, we can make this a progressive web app in the sense that we can make it offline first, and we can cache and do service work and so on. And then there would be that confusion. What do you mean web app? It's not a web app. It's So how we name things is it's getting us into trouble often, I think.
And I think that's
is like, what does it really mean? Well, it doesn't have to be an application. It can just be your presence on the web, using those APIs.
And that's something that, like, I kind of have I've had some discussions with people around this, and like people are like, yeah, but it's essentially just static sites repackaged, and it's just hype and whatever. And I actually don't think that's a fair criticism. But I also kind of find it problematic that people talk about just hype. Like when you think about HTML5, when you think about Web 2.0, when you think about serverless, like hype is like taking away all the negative connotations is a super powerful thing in terms of just mobilizing communities of people. Like to this day, I still don't really know kind of what CSS3 is. But it was something, and people were excited about it, and people started paying attention. And I think it's it's the same with like PWAs as well. Like I think in the majority of cases when people talk about PWAs, they're actually talking about something completely different. But I think it's just like there's kind of like there's a momentum there that you can tap into, and the same with like Web 2.0 and all of those things. Like there's something happening, we don't really know what it is just yet, we can't really define it, we're figuring out how to describe it, but something's happening here, and this is kind of the best way we can describe it at this point. It's only then in retrospect that you can kind of see what actually ended up happening.
Yeah, and I think when some of these things embody lots of different technologies just used in a particular way, it kind of fragments the conversation until you've got a term that you can say that it's this. But by doing that, you do also open yourself up to people saying, well, hang on, that means it's really hard to define. What exactly is it? I think people do want to know, well, what's the checklist where I can tick each of these things and then I can say I am Jamstack. And one of the more recent challenges as well is that I think this approach is kind of evolving as well. It's not like because if it had just been locked in time, effectively it would have been generating some static assets and doing that with some automation and getting them to the CDN, and then we could stop there and make the automation and the tooling around that great, but ultimately it doesn't move things along. But one of the first kind of slight kind of, I don't know, just raising of the ceiling that I saw in that was on Netlify. I'm not sure if people are familiar with the redirects API on Netlify, but what that is it's a very simple kind of configuration language, either in the TOML file or as just a file of this route goes to this route with this HTTP response code that you deploy as part of your code. And that tells the CDN edge nodes redirects rules to, there you go, nice one, what redirects rules to honor on the traffic to your site. Now, strictly speaking, that's configuring CDNs. That's not like pre-generating sites, what have you. It's just kind of pushing the tooling a bit further and just taking you slightly deeper into the experiences that you can create. And so I think we've always been on this road of, okay, we're expanding really what is like the purest sense, something that's JavaScript APIs and markup. So the term is always going to kind of evolve a little bit. But I think the spirit of it is about pre-generating things, as Kenny was saying earlier on, getting them deployed into a atomic immutable deploy that lives on a CDN that kind of lives in perpetuity. But then we're kind of pushing the ceiling with other things like the redirects API, and Kenny mentioned kind of incremental static regeneration, and what we're excited about at the moment, DPR or distributed persistent rendering. Everything's got to have a 3-letter acronym, otherwise it's not computery enough. That's the rule, I think. But again, these things are just kind of expanding the model, right? Sorry, Kenny.
Yeah, I mean, and the fact that there's a lot going on at the moment in the Jamstack ecosystem kind of like makes it impossible not to continue to iterate and improve the architecture. I mean, there's tons and tons of static site generators now, and there's more coming out. There's a lot of CMSs, headless CMSs. We just saw Shopify release a new API that's just went headless. So like there's so much opportunities, there's so much innovation coming out from all different parts of the ecosystem, of the Jamstack ecosystem, that just means that you have to continuously improve the architecture and continue to iterate on it. If we looked it as, like Phil rightly said, generate static assets, put them on the CDM, that's it, you're done. We'll run into problems, right? So that's why I feel like it's really good that at this point, you can literally do, well, I wouldn't go as far as saying anything, but you can, what you could do with Jamstack in 2016 is not what you can do now. You can do a lot more. You can take advantage of serverless functions now, do a lot of backend communication. I think there's a blog post that we wrote about how we built the Jamstack Explorers platform. There's a lot of moving parts, right? But it's still a Jamstack application, right? We did authentication with Auth0. We did image transformations on the fly with Cloudinary. We did a lot of heavy lifting that would ordinarily not fit into what the Jamstack static asset generation would tell you, right? So that's one of the reasons why I feel like not just Jamstack, but any other maybe static site generator or framework or architecture would continuously improve, right? Because at the end of the day, we're trying to solve people's problems, and problems evolve, right? So what I was struggling with today is not exactly what I will struggle with tomorrow. So as the problems evolve, the solutions kind of also evolve with them.
I imagine it must be very difficult. I mean, one of the things we all know if we work in front end is how fast it moves. How do you possibly keep up with everything that's happening and still make it your platform usable for people who might be, I mean, it seems so difficult to me, and yet I've never had an issue with going onto Netlify and going, yeah, I want to do this, and it's like, yeah, okay, cool, go ahead. I mean, there's that joke website, like, how many days has it been since the last JavaScript framework? And it's like 0.
I mean, I think one of the answers to that. Sorry, did I interrupt you, Kenny? Then I did, didn't I?
No,
okay.
Go ahead.
Okay. I think one of the answers to that is in the fact that Netlify is a little bit lower level. We're deliberately agnostic about what you're building in your front end. So I think that liberates us from having to be able to understand all of the things that reach all the way through to the front end. I mean, that's your responsibility, and that's where your expertise. We just don't want to get in the way of that. So right. Really, the majority of what we're doing is letting you run the build, no matter what that is, and then you'll be able to impart your expertise on the front end by we just get out of the way of that. And I think that's one of the advantages of kind of being agnostic and just saying, okay, we'll get your things to the CDN as quickly as we can, and then serve it from there. Right. However, as you say, it does keep evolving, and I think the way that I personally keep on top of that is I take huge liberties with what I choose I'm not going to learn. I don't. So just with this small group, I don't really know React. I don't really know React at all. I'm very fortunate.
Shame on you.
It's being recorded, Phil.
I think I will get chased off the internet for not knowing React. But, I mean, my background is as a front-end engineer and as a JavaScript developer, I guess. And I never bothered to learn React. Now, I have used it to some extent as we built out things like Jamstack Explorers, but I was by far the least productive member of the engineering team when we do that, because the DX team at Netlify, we've got people like Kenny who know React and know Vue and kind of turns his hand to all kinds of things. We've got Cassidy and Jason who have got particularly deep React knowledge, and Jason, of course, used to be at Gatsby, so has got very specific domain expertise there. We've got Tara, who's very much a part of the Angular community and has got lots of knowledge there. And then we've got Ben as well, who's kind of part of the Vue and community and really does lots there. And then there's me, who knows some HTML, and but I'm much more focused on the Netlify platform and the Netlify product, because if I try and learn that other stuff, I just would drown. It's just there's too much. and luckily we don't need us all to be an expert in everything. But I'm always grateful when there are other people around that I can ask, because you can't learn everything.
So
Just
I
being
have a
humble.
question. Like how does it really work? Netlify, like does it work like Elastic Beanstalk, or it works like AWS S3?
Sorry, I don't think I completely got all of the question there. You mentioned Elastic Beanstalk and AWS S3.
And there are S3 buckets. Like you can either deploy, like let's say I've developed a React application. I can either deploy it to AWS S3 bucket, or I can use Elastic Beanstalk. Then I create an EC2 instance server. That's my question. Like, how does it really work?
How does Netlify really work compared to those things? Is that
Yeah.
So I mean, you're quite right. You could be building out your front end or your site and deploying it to S3 or to any other infrastructure you like, and that would be in many ways you'd get some similar results to what you'd be doing if you were to host something on Netlify, except Netlify is slightly different in terms of the workflows that you get on top of that. So so behind the scenes, Netlify is doing many of the things that you mentioned. I mean, we're across lots of different cloud providers, including Amazon, and so certain things are being stored on S3, some of these stored in other infrastructure. But then there's a layer on top of that, which is doing all kinds of things which are way more clever than I could describe in terms of making sure that the assets, when they're distributed around to the CDN, only the assets that are changed are propagated, but you as the developer don't have that notion, because for you, every deploy is an atomic thing. So behind the scenes, there's lots of complexity going on, but it is doing various of the things that you're talking about. But it's almost, if you like, a layer of workflow and of sugar on top of many of those things and more besides. I don't know if I'm answering your question, but that's my first salvo over it.
The way I've understood it, it's like it's managing everything for me. Then I just have to focus on developing my application, then I deploy, then you handle all the rest.
Yeah, I mean, it's true. It is managing all of those things, and you know, so the CDN that I say we, I had nothing to do with it. The CDN that Netlify built uses Apache Traffic Server, amongst other things, which is an open source product that has been kind of embellished by Netlify to do lots of kind of fine-tuned performance optimizations, and then also support things like our redirects API and other bits and pieces on top of that as well. So yeah, you're right. It is doing all of those things, and then additional configuration on top of that to be able to kind of add some of these other bits of functionality that go beyond serving just static assets effectively.
Sorry, Skulk. We're getting quite far into this, and we've actually gone over a lot of time. Phil, would you mind if we asked a couple more questions?
I'm fine.
I know it's Friday evening.
I know we have to lose Kenny, because Kenny's got another engagement. Yeah. So thanks, Kenny, for sticking with us.
Bye, everyone. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Kenny.
See you soon,
Thank
Kenny.
you so much for joining us.
All right.
Great to meet you.
But yeah, I'm more than happy to hang around and answer some more questions.
We just got a couple of questions that came via the community. One was, is there anything on the roadmap to be able to schedule, i.e. cron Netlify functions?
Whoa, $1 million question. So that's a very requested feature, and I think one of the reasons that we haven't shipped that yet is that is kind of solvable through using some other tools along with Netlify. So things like Zapier, for instance, you can there's lots of ways that you can fire events to our deploy hook so that you can schedule deployments and other bits and pieces. So that's one of the reasons I think that hasn't been, we've shipped other things first. I wouldn't be surprised if we eventually get that. I couldn't tell you when that's coming. But I think it's so popular that we ought to be doing it. And I know that I would use it quickly, but at the moment, you can get access to those kind of things by adding them to using other sites. In fact, I've got a terrible. I'm going to share something which is a really shocking example of this that I built out a long time ago. Sorry, I'm terrible at typing and talking at the same time. Let's see. Yeah, so this site, Set Your Watch by Netlify. I made this a few years ago, and so it's interesting. I don't think I've ever tested it in South Africa, but that is a clock which we've seen on the web before, but the time isn't built with JavaScript. That was the time that the site was built, and I use something called WebTask, which I think might no longer be accepting new users. But anyway, it's just an event. It's basically a cron job that fires my build every minute.
That's amazing.
And of course that's an absurd thing to do. But the reason I made that was just to try and address some of the bits of pushback I'd often get about pre-generating sites, which is, you've got to run a build when you need to update the site. That's really prohibitively difficult. And that's the opinion that lots of people have if they've come from big architectures that are cumbersome and you need to have a 2-week code freeze when you do deployment, which is optimistic for some of the projects I've been on in the past. So I was trying to illustrate that deploying a site should be mundane and as close to free as it can be. So that's why I made this preposterous site that redeploys every minute of the day. That's using a cron job elsewhere that's firing a webhook. But yeah, I'll soon change this so that we start using things like edge handlers, which are again expanding what you can do with Jamstack without compromising like the tooling, the workflow, and some of the principles of like atomic immutable deploys. Anywho, sorry, that's a small tangent, but I've got to show this site off before I eventually retire it. I think the infrastructure team are keen for me to retire it eventually.
Great, thanks. Skulk, you had a question.
Yeah. So
the DB one.
Yeah. So I've been playing around quite a bit with FaunaDB recently. It's changing my life. And I was super excited to kind of hear that there is some integration with Netlify. I'm not gonna lie, I was a bit underwhelmed by that, like what the actual integration gives you. So I think my question was specifically, so I shared this one with Justin beforehand, is like, is there anything on the roadmap in terms of, I won't expect like Netlify to go like full on Firebase, and then just include their own DB. But is there like anything on the roadmap in terms of bringing like some type of solution that you can use kind of as a cloud database more into kind of the fold of the Netlify ecosystem?
Yeah, that's a great question, and I think another like common request, right? And so I think, in all honesty, I think it's unlikely that you'll see Netlify DB, like a fully fledged database offering as built by Netlify and powered by Netlify, because there is first of all, because it's a whole another very challenging problem space, and there are so many great providers for that. Now, I do agree with you that if we have an integration, you kind of want that to be, well, I just want to go into the Netlify workflow and then Bob's your uncle. I've got a database ready to go, and I don't think we're quite there yet. And I think, if anything, in this space, what we'll probably see is tighter partnerships with existing database providers. perhaps trying to bring that experience to become a bit more seamless. I think that's more likely than a completely kind of branded Netlify database offering, I believe. I would say that, yeah, I'm with you as well on Fauna. Fauna's a wonderful product. And there are quite a few database kind of services now that are, again, just reducing that level of friction. I don't know if you've encountered Supabase at all recently. That's my kind of recent kind of database darling. I really enjoyed using that. And I think one of the reasons for that is that like we were talking about earlier on, the on-ramp is really shallow. There's very little friction for getting started. But you do need to go to another place, create an account with a different service, and and you can be very quickly using their API and getting data into whatever you're building on. But it is another service. And so I mean, I can't make any promises, and there's nothing on the roadmap that I particularly point to, but I think it's more likely that we'll see the developer experience bridging between those things becoming smoother rather than a Netlify database offering per se. Is my instinct. I don't have full visibility over that, but I think that's probably fair to say.
Yeah, and then I think that kind of really it hits the nail on the head in terms of kind of what the problems are, like the pain points. You know, unfortunately, so a good friend of mine, Gareth, who's kind of like I almost want to say like experience engineer, or you know, I don't even know what all these titles are anymore, but I think like he's doing very much the kind of the same thing that you guys are doing at serverless.com. And like their main thing is that, you know, like one of the problems with the Jamstack is that it is like it's just so many moving parts. And like as you mentioned, you know, like what I also tend to do is Zapier set like a webhook to fire like every X amount of time. But to me, that's like now I need an account on like a completely different service.
Yeah.
Where I need to remember a password, I need to remember an email. If things stop working, I need to log into a completely different service and see what's going on, just to have my thing kind of build without me actually pressing a button. So like it's almost it's kind of that thing of like a death by 1,000 cuts. You know, it's like that in itself isn't that bad, but these things add up. So yeah, definitely. I think what you kind of spoke to is like that is kind of what I'm kind of my pain point with the Jamstack at the moment is not necessarily that there aren't any good DBs out there. I think there are some amazing ones. I don't think you'll be doing anyone a favor by building your own one, but it's that integration. And I think I've been using the Netlify auth and cloud functions quite a lot recently. And I really enjoy the integration there. I really enjoy kind of like if you send the access token, then you immediately have all of this information at hand that's kind of hidden behind the kind of the auth layer. So like I really enjoy, and I think I mentioned I was kind of a bit disappointed by the integration with FaunaDB because I think that's kind of where my expectations were set.
Yeah.
And when I did the FaunaDB integration, like I was hoping I'd get something like that, you know, where there's like some magic info being passed from Netlify to Fauna.
Yeah, I agree with you on that. I think that's got a way to go, and I think our I'm expecting that kind of thing to improve. I must admit. I think so comparing the using a third-party service and having a third-party service really well integrated, a good comparison potentially would be, I mean, you mentioned kind of Netlify functions there. Netlify functions effectively is an integration with AWS Lambda that you just engage with Netlify for. That's exactly the kind of integration I'd like to see for some database offerings, I think, where you get access to that and you can do it through Netlify. I'm not quite sure it'll be quite in the same manner, but it's that level of okay, well, I can take the workflow that I'm already using and the tools that I'm already using, and they just reach further now. That for me is that's the goal and the kind of standard that I'm excited by, because once you've got a mental model for how you build your site locally, how you deploy it to a staging URL, how you can do all of the branch builds, pull requests, all of those kind of things, and then end up on a production environment. If you can use that exact same mental model, and then it just extends to serverless functions as well, which I always had a huge pain, in like fine building them, but then deploying updates, versioning them, doing the permissions of them,
100%.
all of those things. If you can take away those pain points, just because those are kind of almost commoditized, those that piece, and just extend the experience that you're used to into those territories, that's for me the perfect kind of integration. So that's what I would like to see happening into some of these other services like databases and what have you. And I can't make any promises, but I think that's probably a goal that lots of people are kind of interested in.
For me, the big win with the Netlify functions is version control. That alone for me is worth the purchasing price.
I totally agree. Yeah, the fact that and that's another reason where we're really very cautious about extending or expanding what you can do with Jamstack without like throwing away the fundamentals of it. So you mentioned version control for serverless functions. I mean, that we think that's really important. Being able to roll back to a previous version of the site, be that the front end and your APIs, that's huge. Keeping those in lockstep, that's really big. And so protecting those principles of having atomic, immutable deploys that once they're deployed, they live on, and you can just move up to the next version. You can step back and what have you. That's really valuable. So that's why we've been looking at this model of distributed persistent rendering, which is very similar to ISR, but just maintains atomic immutable deploys. So in other words, I'm sorry, I'm using lots of flowery words, but so DPR, I'll call it DPR instead of distributed persistent rendering, but DPR is this model effectively of doing serverless renders. Having URLs that resolve to serverless functions, and those serverless functions will return a view, but they don't just return it for you, they return it into the deploy, into the cache, if you like, into the globally distributed kind of deployment, which means you can do things such as deploy a site that normally would have maybe millions of pages, which would take your build a very, very long time to make, and which is kind of a limitation for Jamstack. And so you can say, well, some of these pages we know get lots of traffic, so we'll build those out right away. Some of them, I don't know, maybe there are archived news from 2001, that people aren't hitting those news stories so much. So actually, we'll just render those the first time someone comes and asks for them. But once they're rendered, they joined the rest of the assets in the deployment, so that subsequent requests for that, they're there and ready to go. But critically, once you start populating the deployment like that over time, there's still an atomic deploy that you can roll back to and kind of move backwards and forwards. So you just keep all of that version control and all of those things. So it's starting to nibble around the edges of what we're saying, what is Jamstack. But ultimately, as long as it's protecting those fundamentals, it means the mental model stays the same, and we're not asking developers to worry about caching and all those things. Sorry, I went off on a huge tangent there. After you were asking me
super
about
interesting.
databases, I promise that
very interesting.
I promise that wasn't a diversion.
I have a more prosaic question that came also via the community, was that you currently have support for GitHub. What is it? Is it GitHub, GitLab, and Bitbucket?
Yes.
Azure repos. Yes or no?
I'm not very knowledgeable about that. I'm not aware of it on the roadmap, but that does not mean that it's on it. I'm not aware of it imminently. Usually, we kind of assess what the market demand is for that.
The demand is,
yeah, and so I wouldn't rule it out, but I must admit I'm not knowledgeable.
Yeah.
You can bring your own self-hosted Git repositories as well. But no, for Azure, I must admit I'm afraid.
Yeah, Azure tends to have release pipelines and hosting and all that anyway. So I was a little bit surprised about that question because it seems to me it's like two different models that are happening there.
Yeah, although I think, I mean, sometimes people want to be able to use one, you want to be able to use Netlify, but they've got constraints about where parts of their infrastructure have to live. Which is why, one of the reasons that we were keen to support kind of self-hosted and enterprise instances of GitHub and GitLab or what have you, because that's often a constraint, particularly for larger organizations. So our Git repo has to live on our server here, and that's the only place.
Yes, right.
So it question might be motivated by something like that.
Probably, yes.
Yeah, I've actually worked on 2 projects where I've advocated we move to Netlify, and then that was actually one of the concerns, that it was Azure projects.
Right.
But I'm not a big fan of the version control. So to me, that was actually like it actually ended up like being like an extra pull for me to move to like GitHub or something. If we want to use Netlify, our hands being forced here. But like that is something, and there are ways to do it, but like that's very much kind of within the realm of deploying to H3 bucket, or there's a lot of like in between steps.
And I mean some people they've got requirements where they can't share build infrastructure with anyone, so they'll and so we do offer like a dedicated build infrastructure as well if need be, or there's the enterprise build is already kind of separated from the more general build population, but there are occasional special cases where people say I have to be the single tenant on this build infrastructure, and so that can happen. But of course, sometimes the conversations also go to, I've had people say, we want to build out with Netlify, we want the whole workflow, but we have to have our own private CDN. So, well, what do you mean a private CDN? Well, we have to have a CDN that's on our infrastructure. So, then it becomes a conversation about, well, what is a CDN and where does it reside? It's very often that you'll hear those kind of conversations, because particularly it's a very large organization that maybe hasn't been used to these kind of actual scale of operations. There are lots of compliance kind of and regulatory constraints that put on them that have arrived before this kind of infrastructure has matured, and things like CDNs really existed in the way that they do now. So so it's interesting the kind of conversations you can get into when you talk to people.
Yeah, that's definitely, I mean, that's something I'm very familiar with. We do a lot of work with highly regulated industries, and they are, let's just say they deploy processes are not particularly fast.
Like
300 people have to sign it off, it's like,
I've definitely lived in that world. I think one of the shifts I was kind of most proud of is working with a very large company who has like thousands of brands, and when I was working as an agency and helping to show them how you could move to a pre-generated kind of Jamstack approach off their very expensive, globally kind of managed and maintained infrastructure, and actually just go light years faster. Sorry, well, hang on. A light year is a distance. So what am I saying? I mean, a lot faster.
Speed and time and energy.
I was getting overexcited then. I'm sorry, but yeah. So just be able to cut the team that needs to touch a project down to a very much more streamlined team, and be able to go way faster and not have to do code and content freezes when you need to do a deployment, and actually have a staging environment that is really a reflection of the production environment and all those kind of things. And so like working with a big organization to help them look at an alternative and embrace it is really rewarding. And I think larger enterprises are getting more amenable to this now, because I think people are getting frustrated with, well, why do I need a team of 40 people and 4 weeks to deploy the site? and it's interesting to me that, you know, now we're working on, you know, in this world of kind of pre-generating sites and headless CMSs and what have you, people are getting frustrated by, well, why can't I see my update immediately when I push the button? Which is a great world to be in, because, you know, now we're expecting, we have the expectation of you make a change and it's deployed in moments. And I like the fact that, although that is challenging in, like, for very large sites on a Jamstack architecture, the fact that our expectations as developers and content managers and clients of these sites, our expectation now is that, well, we should be able to see these in moments, rather than I accept that it's a many week turnaround to be able to see these things in the world. So I think that's great news for us when we're looking at trying to build better developer experiences so that they can create better user experiences and, you know, all the rest of it. So it's an exciting development to me, I think.
I think for me personally as well, like, and I also just want to say, like, you know, like, Justin isn't being paid a cent here to talk about like how easy Netlify is to use. I just want to make that clear. You
got the email, Justin. I'm very grateful that you got all the talking.
Funds are being transferred now. So no, like, because no,
I'm a fan. What can I say?
No, but for me as well, you know, like I'm also scared that, you know, I guess maybe that's why I intentionally kind of raised my disappointment about the Fauna integration, just to kind of like, because I'm scared it might come across as kind of like a marketing like thing. But like, I think we really, like, I'm myself as well, I'm just a really big fan as well. But yeah, like, but so, like, that's just an aside that I wanted to mention. But, you know, on this topic of like kind of just ease of use and so forth, and like, I sometimes find that actually works against kind of Netlify. Specifically, so with a lot of my students, I just have them use Netlify drop. And some of these institutions that I teach, there's a specific one where I kind of started introducing it, and I was kind of pulled aside, and they had like the alumni had like a chat with me and so forth, and they said, like, yeah, you know, it's cool and all that you're learning them these things, but, you know, they need to know how to do it in the real world when they get out there, you know. And like, to me, that's such like a bit of me died inside that day. But because like, I think a lot of those people back when they were in the industry, their reference was kind of like a lab stack. You buy the domain name, you set up the DNS, you probably have some SQL thing that you need to configure, and you upload the wrong DB, and now you need to drop the whole thing again, and you're like, oh, here's the right one, and it uploads, and it doesn't upload fully. And after 2 days you can do a hello world. And I think and I think, like, because like that's the experience of a lot of people, immediately their kind of assumption is, because it's so easy, that it's inferior, or it's not real, or there's some catch.
It's not serious.
So, 100%. I think that is the unfortunate kind of other edge of this double-edged sword, that, you know, so much effort has been put in to making the user experience feel simple, and to abstract away, you know, huge layers of complexity, because you shouldn't need to worry about it. It should, you know, you should be able to inherit that, like we were talking about earlier on. But as you rightly mentioned, you know, the flip side to that is that very quickly you train people to think this is simple. It's not doing very much. And yeah, I mean, it's an interesting challenge to have. And I think, you know, as we're seeing, you know, frankly, all of the services in this kind of sector, and certainly Netlify gradually expanding what you can do with it and adding more and more features, the battle that we always have internally, and I'm so like delighted with the work that the kind of the user experience kind of research teams and the UI teams, and, you know, all of the people building the product at Netlify do. They have such care over trying to make sure that the experience always remains logical and simple. Whereas, you know, it's very easy to add a feature as long as you know how to navigate it and do all the bits and pieces. But to add a feature that feels simple takes huge amounts of work. but then people think, oh, it's just a checkbox. That's easy. I mean, the fact that I haven't had to think about provisioning TLS for years now, because every time I register a domain, I automatically get HTTPS and it's all set up for me. I don't even need to check a box anymore. So that means, well, that's an easy thing, right? But of course, behind the scenes, there's lots of stuff going on, and examples like that are really kind of interesting. So there definitely is an education piece for. I mean, certainly that's what I and the team I'm a part of are a big part. To try and spend a lot of effort on trying to educate people on actually what this is doing and what you're getting, without making it feel complicated. And it's definitely a balancing act. I think we're going to see some. I'm very interested to see how people respond to Netlify when they start using the CLI more, because until quite recently I didn't use the CLI very much, because I've encountered Netlify through the admin UI and that's how I use it. But lots of people prefer to just to stay in their terminal. And we've got a team building out the CLI for Netlify who have really it's been evolving very, very quickly. And you can do so much just through the CLI. And that feels a bit more technical, in some ways. And I'm not suggesting that this is a great way to pitch it to feel more complicated. For many people, this actually will feel simpler, because they're used to creating a project in the CLI. They use Git through the CLI, a couple of commands, they can create a site, set their environment variables kind of like from the CLI and deploy from the CLI and all of those things. And so I'm kind of interested to see when we start talking about the CLI a little bit more and showing people how much you can do with it, if the perception changes a little bit, because it's a command that you type in a scary black window, with
it's like the Matrix,
green text flashing at you. So it's scary. Whereas a nice shiny simple button that you press is different. I'm being a bit flippant, but I think the perception is a little bit different, and you more quickly expose a lot of the things that you can do by running Netlify help and seeing a list of the commands, and then you're oh crumbs, you can get at all of these things. So it's an interesting one to navigate, making things as simple as possible so that they're easy to use, but also reminding people that they're getting access to lots of things behind the scenes that you don't have to do yourself. So I think it's one of the reasons why often people who really appreciate tools such as Netlify are people who've really had to do things the hard way previously. I kind of grinned when Dushenga mentioned FTPing,
FileZilla.
I mean, that's yes. I get my palms go sweaty just just thinking about the mistakes I've made deploying things with FTP on projects that are way too big to have me using CyberDuck or whatever it was I was using.
CyberDuck, yes.
Yeah. So like, how are we looking for time?
I think it's time to let Phil have a Friday evening.
Okay.
Well, thanks so much. I'm very grateful for the time, and I'm so pleased that people hung around and listened to me and Kenny waffling on.
Thank you from us. It's been a real pleasure to have you, and thanks so much for giving us your time to answer our questions and just to chat about things. As Skulk mentioned, we're big Netlify fans. The Netlify cheerleading squad in South Africa.
Great. Well, I appreciate it. I mean, I was a massive Netlify cheerleader before I joined Netlify, and then I joined Netlify, and so my credibility as a cheerleader for Netlify went through the floor, because it's now you're paid to say these things.
Yeah.
So I'm very grateful when there are people who aren't paid by Netlify who say nice things. So thanks for your kindness. It's great.
No, thank you very much. It's been great chatting.
Cool.
We will put the recording up on our YouTube channel in due course. I'll send you the link if you're interested in sharing it, maybe on Twitter.
I'll share
or
it,
something.
and hopefully I won't get fired. I don't think I said anything that will land me in too much trouble. I think
you can preview it before you share.
I'm sure we'll be okay.
Yeah, and thanks to everyone else who's joined us on Friday evening. I'm just going to quickly pop the links to those 2 meetups I mentioned in the introduction.
We can put them in the description of the video as well when we upload
we
it.
will do that. That's the Connect Dev Africa and the Nairobi GraphQL. And of course, you can find us on the ZA Tech Slack, where we have a channel. Yeah. Great. Thanks again, Phil, and to Kenny.
Yes.
We really appreciate your time. And yeah, thanks everyone. This was a great talk. I really enjoyed it. We will see you anon. Enjoy the weekend.
Thanks everyone. Enjoy your weekend.
Cool, guys.
Thanks so much. See you.
Have a great weekend.
Bye.
Bye.